Now Formula One pre-season testing is finally in the rearview mirror. It's time to give you the ranking that you've all been waiting for. Our definitive list of the top 10 teams in what we think is paced order heading into the coming season. Scott Mitchell and Ed Straw here to run the rule over the field after 8 days of pre-season testing, pounding around Barcelona endlessly. Scott, let's start with our number 10. In at 10, I don't think there's going to be any surprises here.
Mercedes.
No, of course not. But they do have a Mercedes engine, just not making particularly good use of it at the moment. Williams.
Not great, is it? It's test started 2.5 days late. Basically, if you interpret what Robert Kubica said, it basically ended a day early as well. He said that they lost a day right at the very end. Turned up late. It was slow to get going. When it did turn up, they were missing parts. It was then slow when it got going, and then they were missing parts effectively at the end. So, all in all, a pretty dismal couple of weeks in Spain for Williams, and commiserations really to the guys and girls at Grove and Trackside that worked so hard to get it on track, because I wouldn't say it was a waste of time, but they look up against it heading to Melbourne.
Yeah, tough job for them. Long road ahead. Moving up slightly in the order, at number 9, maybe a surprise to some viewers given a few headline lap times through the second week particularly. Mclaren. Ed, just explain why the Mclaren is so low in the ranking.
Well, they just haven't really shown, when you make all the usual adjustments for tyres and fuel loads and what we know, that they've got massive pace. They are in the midfield. It's not too bad for McLaren. Remember, they had a pretty serious blow last year when they realised that just getting rid of Honda wasn't going to solve all their problems. It didn't prove to be the panacea they hoped. And so this is a team that's really been looking inward, improving itself technically, and this is a new start for it. So I don't think we should be too negative about it in terms of judging their position as to where they should be, because they should be at a bit of a 0 point. The car looks a little bit unstable at the rear again. That's not ideal. So they're all right. They're in the mid-pack. They've got something to build on, but it's not going to be an easy road back to the front of the midfield. But this is step one. So if they can start okay and then put performance on, that could be a passable season for the team. You know, the days when we expect McLaren to win world championships have passed by quite some time ago. They're working their way back to the front of the midfield first. That's number one objective, and then maybe they can think about regaining past glories once they've got to there.
Scott, moving on to number 8, another team you'd expect to actually end up higher than this come the end of the season, Racing Point.
Yeah, bit of a vanilla car. I think that was the description that technical director Andrew Green used.
Yeah, not flattering words to use about your own car.
No, and at the end of the test, Tom McCulloch described it as their launch car. So 2 weeks, 2 weeks of running, I suspect, just for the team to get to grips with their base package so they know what exactly needs improving. So presumably to validate the areas that they were planning upgrades, and maybe obviously then factor in sort of beyond that, so races 2, 3, 4, etc., sort of other elements to develop. But not a very convincing showing, not a huge amount of laps, not a huge amount of pace either, really. But if it is base spec, effectively, and this was just about learning the ropes, then I guess they'll probably be more encouraged, but pure pace at the moment doesn't look particularly impressive. It could be a slow start, but the one saving grace for Racing Point is that in its previous life as Force India, there's an excellent technical team there. They're very, very good at developing the car, very good at out-developing better resource rivals as well. So, yeah, wouldn't expect them to be in this place in the ranking at the end of the season, but that is ultimately where they look to be at the moment.
Moving into the next kind of midfield grouping, probably at the bottom end of the top end of the midfield, if you like, Ed. Toro Rosso, much change behind the scenes there in the technical team with James Key leaving, and a closer relationship now with parent team Red Bull again. Now they're both using Honda engines. What do we make of the Toro Rosso, 7th best car in our ranking?
Yeah, not a bad start for them. They're very much in the mix. They're expecting to have a slightly slow start relative to where they're expecting to get to. They're trying to really make sure they push through regular upgrades rather than having big upgrade packages. They're taking a more, should we say, modern approach to it. So I think we'll see Toro Rosso start reasonably well. It looks like there's a bit of a rear end limitation on the car. Nothing terrible, just needs a bit more downforce, I think. So I think Toro Rosso, solid start. Nothing spectacular, but fine.
Scott, let's move on to the top 6 now. And in 6th place, the Alfa Romeo, a strong start to testing for them, but maybe a little bit of levelling off in terms of progression through the second week?
Yeah, I don't think that the Alfa Romeos got worse. I just think that they sort of maybe hit their potential or close to their potential straight out the box. So it looked really promising in week one, and then a couple of other rivals basically have made progress and extracted more from their package. So not necessarily that Alfa have started to do a worse job, if you see what I mean, but just that others have caught up. They've effectively regressed to where they actually are in the pecking order. The car,
and where they finished last season as Sauber.
Yeah, absolutely. The car, it doesn't look perfect on track. You wouldn't expect that for a team that we've placed 6th in the ranking.
No, a bit leery at the rear.
Yeah, which is a Sauber trait that they've not only have they inherited the entry, they've inherited that sort of tail happiness of the car as well. But the drivers are still positive. Kimi Räikkönen especially.
Well, he loves a pointy front end.
Yeah, but he's sort of talking in the sense that you kind of feel that there is this big positive feeling in the team. This, again, it's a bit similar to Racing Point. When that technical team got going last year with new investment, they made great strides, did Sauber. They started the season fighting with Williams and the medical car into turn one at Melbourne, and they ended the year as a regular top 10 qualifier and finisher. So we know that there's good development potential there. So if they're starting at 6th, who's to say that they might not be challenging to be outright best of the rest this year once the season gets going?
Let's move to the top part of that bracket now. Difficult choice to pick teams for 4th and 5th, very close, but in the end we've gone for Renault as 5th best, which might surprise considering that's a team that's looking to break clear of this group. So just explain why Renault aren't yet, in our view, top of the midfield group, Ed.
It is very, very close, so it's nip and tuck with them and the other team at the front of the group. I think Renault have been a little bit disappointing in that we've got high expectations for this team. A lot of money has been spent there. They're trying to bridge across from this Class B group up to the top 3. We weren't expecting them to join the top 3 this year, but they needed to be really striking out into that wasteland between them. It doesn't look like they have as yet. They might have a little bit of a fight on their hands at the front of it. The car's good. It works pretty well.
Some good gains on the engine side that we've been talking about too.
It's pretty reasonable. It's pretty decent, but we haven't seen the consistent speed that perhaps we'd expect to see from that car. They've had a few problems. They've been a bit short on spares, so the drivers have had to be a little bit careful. So maybe there's a bit more time if they attacked a bit more, because it's very easy to do damage to the front wings and that kind of thing if you're hitting curbs too hard. So it might be a slightly false read, but I think, yeah, there's more work needs to be done on that car, and I need to see the team really knows how to get the best out of it, because it is quite a big change from what they had last year.
One thing I would add on the Renault side is that both chassis and engine, their respective technical directors, Nick Chester and Remy Taffam, have both said that they're pleased with the platform that they've got and the progress that they've made. And on the engine side in particular, they say they set their targets high and met them. And Renault were quite...
Is that not just bluster from Renault though? We've heard this kind of chat before. What gives you extra confidence?
The reason I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt is because last year in particular, they were very honest once the season started that they'd not missed their targets, but they'd set the targets too low. And I think they also, that was on the engine side, but then also as the season went on, they admitted that they hadn't developed the car well enough. So they faced up to their failings. It wasn't like they hid behind something or made an excuse. So, I always say that if someone's honest and say when they've done something bad, you then give them the benefit of the doubt more if they say something good, or you're more inclined to trust them. You still give them that big old pinch of salt, but maybe you can trust them a bit more. So what I think the main thing for me is that sort of message from the team and the way they are, their demeanour, what they're saying and how they're saying it, it doesn't quite tally with the sort of poor showing, which is odd because normally I would judge this the other way around. I'd say, oh, well, these guys, they're saying this, but the data suggests otherwise. It's quite weird. It doesn't quite match how they were last year.
So you don't trust the data in this case then?
I just wonder if they had any limiting factors or maybe they just weren't quite comfortable pushing it to the limit, because one of the things we have seen with the Renault before is that they do have this ultimate performance, but they can't always quite access it, especially on the engine side where they have to run slightly limited and stuff like that. So just wonder if there is actually more from that package to come. And
so let's turn to the team that has beaten them just to that 4th place, Ed. Haas, very impressive package, flying slightly below the radar in terms of headline lap times, and offset programs really compared to their rivals. So why is the Haas such an impressive car, and why do we think that at the moment it's the midfield leader?
I think it's similar reasons to last year. The car looks very good on track. It's very benign. It does what the driver wants. When it's going, that is. It had a few too many mechanical problems, which is a concern. But in terms of pace and doing what the driver wants, really good. And it's just a car that Haas understands now, I think, how to get the best out of it. In their early years, first couple of years in F1, they weren't always so good at maximising the car on a given weekend. Haas went really well in Melbourne last year, and perhaps they can get that best of the rest position that they threw away with those two unfortunate pit stop errors.
Now we're out of the midfield group, it's time to turn to the big three. And third in that ranking, it's been quite close, and for a while it was maybe looking like this team was slightly better off, but the final couple of days of testing, particularly tough for Red Bull Honda, and they've ended up slipping down to third in our rankings.
Well, I think it's because even though they're very, very happy with the start of their new partnership with Honda, and it looks like Honda has made progress and looks like it has got closer to Mercedes and Ferrari over the winter, they are still in the same position effectively as they were with Renault, Red Bull, because they just don't quite have that ultimate one-lap pace. And there were a few reasons why we didn't ultimately see Red Bull sort of maybe push it on a qualifying sim. I suspect we probably would have seen it on the final day, but Max Verstappen's running was limited to 29 laps because it was the legacy of Gasly's big shunt on the penultimate day and the gearbox change, and they ran out of parts basically. Just a bit of an oversimplification of their problem, but that set them back, and it meant that they lost the opportunity to do what Mercedes effectively did on the final day, which was finally give a lap time that goes, so that's what you're really about. I do think it's really close. I don't think they're cut adrift, and I don't think the switch to Honda has suddenly exposed a really horrible reality where Red Bull are going to be regretting it. I just don't think at the moment, certainly, we haven't quite seen enough evidence to suggest that they're quite on terms with the top two. Not at the moment anyway.
Obviously, there's the Honda question mark. They need to improve the qualifying engine modes. We understand they have done, but they won't suddenly get to Ferrari Mercedes level in terms of Saturday modes in one leap. But it sounds like they've made a pretty big stride in terms of that. Maybe they've halved that gap. There's a few other questions with a Honda, such as fuel consumption on certain tracks, which could cause a few minor problems. But overall, that package is looking good. At the absolute worst, they are in the same place Red Bull with the Renault engines was last year. And that was a package that could win races. Probably a little bit better off than that. I think what we will see this year is a Honda win again for the first time in 13 years or so, back to 2006.
Be a phenomenal achievement for that program, considering how badly it was born in the hybrid era.
Exactly, and that's probably the confidence Honda needs to really commit even longer term. I think it's only a 2-year deal initially with Red Bull, so yeah, particularly Monaco, there'll be a chance there. They'd hope so. Yeah, positive start.
And in second place, just squeaking in really with an excellent final day performance after a tough run through the first 7 days of pre-season testing, Mercedes. Probably a disappointing result for them, considering that usually they're the ones setting the world on fire in the phony war of winter testing.
Well, Mercedes are certainly the victims of their own high standards, aren't they, when it comes to pre-season testing? Yes, well, they did the first test with a relatively basic car, an earlier kind of version of it. This huge aerodynamic upgrade they brought to the second test has given them effectively almost a new car. You could argue in terms of the way it's working.
Yes.
In terms of the performance, they're not too far behind. Ultimately, the 0.003 of a second gap on the timesheets is, I think, a little bit of an illusion. Vettel could have been a couple of tenths faster in the final sector for starters on that lap. And also, we did see a really, really good lap on the C3s, the middle compound of tyres from Sebastian Vettel in the Ferrari, which, if you adjust for the compound differences, puts it back to about 0.3 ahead of Mercedes. So it looks like Mercedes is around 0.3 behind. They are not the leaders. They have finished firmly second, and in fact, as you said, the fact they're second rather than third is probably indicative of a good past few days.
I suspect if Ferrari team principal Mattia Binotto is watching this video, I don't know what he does in his spare time, maybe he is, he's probably going to disagree with this, because he said in response to Lewis Hamilton suggesting that Ferrari might be as much as half a second ahead of Mercedes, that it would be completely wrong to think that Ferrari's ahead.
Gamesmanship, though, isn't it?
It is definitely gamesmanship to a point. I think the way Mercedes have come out this week, shows that there is much more progress to be made. Hamilton talked about finding a 10th just through sifting through the data and working out how to optimise the car, let alone further improvements that they're going to make to it. So whatever gap there is will shrink. I'd be amazed if we get to the first few races of the season and Ferrari has a multiple 10th advantage, because that's enormous based on obviously the pecking order that we've seen in recent years, but there has been a big aero change. Mercedes does seem to have adapted its front wing philosophy slightly based on what we saw in the first week, so which is a significant thing for it to get its head around. So I don't want to say that Merc basically wasted the first week, because obviously they would have got through a ton of useful information. They'd have planned that program way in advance. They're much more intelligent than I am, so they knew what they were doing. But what they have done is effectively the package that they're much more likely to have in Melbourne. They've had 4 days to work through. Whereas if you did that sort of as a like-for-like comparison, Ferrari have had an extra 4 days. So it makes sense that Ferrari are ahead now, because they've effectively been able to optimise this package just that little bit more than Mercedes have.
Emphatically, it's Ferrari that win our 2019 F1 pre-season ranking. Just explain, beyond obviously the headline lap times, just why the Ferrari looks like the absolute top-notch package on the grid this year so far.
Yeah, well, as well as the lap times in all conditions, when you adjust for various conditions, it just looks fantastic on circuit. It does what the driver wants it to do. They can carry the speed in. Mid-corner, it's great. The traction's great. Wonderful over curbs. The Ferrari for the past 2 years has looked really good on track, but this is it doing the same thing, only more so, you would probably say. So, and even when something does get a little bit out of shape, it comes back beautifully. They don't lose a huge amount of time. So, yeah, Ferrari's got everything it needs. It's got the car. We know it can develop reasonably well through a season. They had that little wobble last season, which they need to avoid, and it's seems to be a much more harmonious team perhaps than it was last season, which is positive. So yeah, Ferrari've got everything. Ultimately though, even if they start a little bit ahead, it's going to be a ferocious development war. Mercedes is not far behind. We saw this last season when it was ebbing and flowing, and you'd see one team would make a step forward and you'd think, oh, right, Mercedes have broken the Ferrari challenge. Then Ferrari would find something and it would go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And I think we'll see the same thing this year. And as well as the development war, of course, we've got the driver's side. So we've got Sebastian Vettel who needs to recover from a difficult season, and Charles Leclerc trying to show just how good he is on his promotion, versus a Lewis Hamilton who was able to turn the tables on Ferrari on occasion last year and is driving even better than ever and an all-time great at his peak. So you've got this foundation for a fantastic championship battle. Just because Ferrari's ahead today doesn't mean it's going to be ahead all season. And I think what we've seen is that Mercedes responds very well to these challenges. They'll redouble their efforts. Everyone at that factory in Brackley in the UK, everyone at Brixworth where they do the engines, will want to improve that car. And Ferrari, the reason Mattia Binotto is trying not to talk up where they are is that he doesn't want complacency, and everyone at Maranello will want exactly the same thing. So it's set up for what could be a fantastic championship fight, and I think that's what we're all hoping for. Regardless of what's happened in testing, it's a long season to go, and it's set up beautifully.
Yeah, it's looking like a fantastic setup, as you say, Ed. The development will be key, and that was the thing that tripped Ferrari up last season. Scott, do you think that Ferrari now is equipped with the right tools, the right mentality, the right working culture to overcome that?
Well, that would support the argument that they've come out the blocks better because they've got a car that they understand, whereas Mercedes is still learning the ropes. But I think Ferrari has definitely been its own worst enemy at times over the last couple of years, whether that's through development, whether that's because of poor reliability. One of the elements that they had on the technical side over the last 2 years that made it formidable was obviously Mattia Binotto in the chief technical officer role. But he's not in that now, he's the team boss. And one of the big question marks will be, has that engineering reshuffle that's had to take place because of his promotion, does that affect what Ferrari can do as the season goes on? Mattia Binotto became team principal at the start of this year, so well beyond the birth of the SF90. So the launch spec of the car and what we see at the moment, I know lead times can be shortened depending on what you're working on, but I don't see any reason why Binotto's move would have affected the launch of the car. Moving him into a different role does affect the development if there is any kind of lag in people getting up to speed with their new positions, or maybe having the confidence to try anything like that. So that's a question mark. And the other question mark is they haven't exactly been perfect on reliability. Not in testing. They had cooling checks that delayed them on the first day of the second week. They're going to do a few more checks just to make sure that the foreign object strike that caused Vettel's left front rim to break and caused his crash was definitely just a strike from a foreign object and not anything else. And then they stopped because of an electrical problem on the last day as well. So
they've had exhaust problems too.
And exhaust problems on the Works Ferrari and on the Haas. So Binotto, when he said he won't let himself be particularly happy with testing, it's not. Well, I know he said it was gamesmanship when he said, "Oh, we're not ahead of Mercedes," but I think it was honest when he said he can't be completely happy with testing because he wants to be quicker and he definitely wants it to be more reliable. So, a few question marks to answer, but as Ed said, that's probably what sets us up for such a good season, because the car that looks the fastest doesn't look completely bulletproof. So maybe there's going to be an opportunity for Mercedes to strike when Ferrari's weak, or maybe Ferrari are going to sort of double their efforts and come out absolutely flying in Australia. We don't know. And considering some people are talking of a 3, 4, 5 tenth advantage for Ferrari, for us to say, oh, there are still doubts about it, sets us up for a brilliant season.